started. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here today to learn more about the draft near-term rate strategy report prepared by E3 and our progress in the Commonwealth's larger rate design study. My name is Katie Gronendijk. I'm a Clean Energy Policy Advisor at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, or EEA. EEA is a core member of the Interagency Rates Working Group alongside the Department of Energy Resources, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Attorney General's Office. Next slide, please. So today I'll first give you some background information on the Interagency Rates Working Group and the work we have planned for the rest of the year. Then our consultant E3 will present to you the results of their near-term rate strategy study. Lastly, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. I'll go over this in more detail later on, but I just want to stress that this is not the only opportunity for public comment on this. We have a series of workshops planned through late August and the beginning of September for different types of stakeholders to provide feedback on the draft study. Next slide, please. So now I'll just try to cover briefly some of the background that led to the creation of the Interagency Rates Working Group, or IRWG, and the ongoing study. Electrification is a critical component of the Commonwealth strategy to reduce emissions in the building and transportation sectors, but existing electric rates are a barrier to achieving widespread electrification. While switching from fossil fuel heating to clean heating technologies provides significant decarbonization benefits, the current electric rate structure results in, on average, higher costs for electric heating compared to natural gas-based heating. This is both a significant barrier to building electrification and could place additional burden on low to moderate income households if this issue is not addressed. Alternative electricity rate design structures could help to reduce electric costs for heat pump users and incentivize switching to heat pumps. If properly designed, they could also address the equity issues associated with higher costs from electrification. The Massachusetts Commission on Clean Heat final report initially recommended evaluating rate designs that can help consumers lower energy costs for efficient electric heating. So the Interagency Rates Working Group was created to analyze alternative rate design options and the implications and impacts associated with different options, and then to make recommendations to advance optimal near and long-term electric rate designs that both prioritize the reduction of energy burden and incentivize transportation and building electrification. Next slide, please. So the near-term rate strategy is the first section of this larger study. The near-term rate strategy looks at barriers to near-term electrification and potential rate design options that could be made available before electric consumers receive advanced metering infrastructure, or AMI meters. Although AMI meters will not be rolled out to most electric customers until 2028, it's critical that we have rate design offerings available sooner that can incentivize customers to switch to heat pumps. We want to be able to provide immediate and equitable benefits and incentives to consumers and accelerate the transition towards electrification as soon as we can. The long-term rate design study will look at more sophisticated long-term rate design reforms that would require AMI meters. I also want to make clear that the near-term rate study does not make recommendations on a particular rate design option, but rather chose a set of different types of rate design options, both universal options, which would be rolled out to all customers, and technology specific, and then modeled the impact of each of these options on the rates of different types of customers. The IRWG will use the results of this analysis to make our recommendations on near-term rate designs and implementation by the end of the year. Next slide, please. So this slide lays out the process we're following in the development of the final report. We began collecting stakeholder input through a series of workshops in May and June to help inform the near-term rate strategy. Thank you to everyone who participated in those and provided input. Since then, E3 has been working hard on the electric rates assessment and near-term rate study. The electric rates assessment looked at the current state of electric rates in Massachusetts for a diverse array of customers and the policy and regulatory landscape that shapes rates. And the near-term rate strategy looks at barriers to near-term electrification and potential rate design options that could be made available before AMI meters are deployed. From now until the end of September, until the beginning of September, we'll be collecting stakeholder feedback on the near-term rate strategy draft report. And then through December, the IRWG will be working on recommendations on next steps to take based on the results of the near-term rate study. In September, we'll hold a series of workshops to collect input before work begins in the long-term rate-making study. That study will present a long-term vision and recommendations for advancing rate-making mechanisms and rates for a decarbonized energy system using rate designs that will be enabled by AMI meters. The draft long-term study will be complete and released by the end of October, after which we'll collect stakeholder feedback through another series of workshops. The IRWG agencies will then draft long-term rate study recommendations by the end of December, and E3 will release its final near-term rate strategy and long-term rate making strategy. Next slide, please. So this shows kind of this process in more detail and the dates you can expect certain workshops and releases. So next week, we'll hold workshops for different groups of stakeholders, including the EDCs, MLPs, and suppliers, consumer advocacy, and distributed generation and distributed energy resources. You can register for these on IRWG's website. The first week of September, we'll also hold a synthesis workshop, which is an opportunity for us to share what we've heard in the sector-specific stakeholder workshops and provide an opportunity for cross-sector conversations. We'd welcome anyone to join this workshop, even if you've already attended a sector-specific workshop. Later in the month, we'll start holding a series of workshops for stakeholders to provide early phase input into the long-term rate strategy study. So this will be similar to the series of workshops that we held back in May and June that provided an opportunity to provide input for E3's work on the near-term rate design study. On the 19th, we'll hold a workshop for all that will provide a deeper look into what we're planning for the long-term study and provide an opportunity for everyone to comment. We'll follow that up with some sector-specific workshops and another synthesis workshop. Next slide, please. So at the end of October, E3 will release their draft long-term rate making study. We'll hold another presentation similar to today's on October 28th, and we'll follow that up with sector-specific workshops, and we'll accept written comment as well. The IRWG then plans to release its recommendations by the end of 2024, and E3 will release its final near-term rate study and long-term rate study. Again, you can register for any of these engagement opportunities on the IRWG website. Next slide, please. So E3 will now present their draft near-term rate strategy report. We welcome feedback at the end of this call, during the series of workshops that will be held the next few weeks, and through written format. We do ask that written comments be sent by September 6th to give us sufficient time to consider them and incorporate feedback into both the report and the IRWG's resulting recommendations. These can be sent to the email listed on this slide. So we plan to use both E3's strategy report as well as stakeholder feedback in the development of the IRWG's final near-term rate recommendations to be released at the end of the year. With that, I'll turn it over to E3 for their presentation.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Vivan Malkani, and I'm a managing consultant at E3 working on this project based in the Boston office of our organization. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Andrew De Benedictis and Ari Gold-Parker, who will also be helping give an overview of our findings here. And as Katie said, we're presenting the near-term rate strategy report draft today, but I'll emphasize that we're presenting an executive summary version of that, and there's a much longer version of that that will be shared in the near future by the IRWG, which goes into more detail in some of the findings that we detail here. So as an outline of our presentation today, I'll start off with a reminder of our study approach and methodology, and then focus on household energy use and energy burden in Massachusetts today. So really taking stock of what energy bills look like today and what the economics of electrification are under today's rates. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Andrew, who will focus on the near-term rate design alternatives that we model in this project to date. And then he'll wrap up with implementation considerations for those different designs and key takeaways from our work so far. So to start, a recap of something that we presented a couple of months ago at the prior workshop. What this is telling us is it's an overview of our modeling methodology, where the key takeaway is that we want to emphasize the diversity of energy expenditure in the state today and understand what different households are paying with today's rates and what they would pay under alternative rates for homes that electrify and get both building and or transportation electrification, as well as homes that retain today's conventional fossil fuel technologies. And the reason this is important is that we want to shift away from an average customer perspective, which glosses over important detail about the distribution of bill impacts of different technology packages, as well as different rate design levers. And understanding this distribution is a really important step to understand these guiding questions shown in the bottom right here, as to which households face the most significant energy burden today, which customers see the best and worst bill impacts of building and vehicle electrification, and then what is the distribution of bill impacts across different household types under different rate designs. And there's a lot of detail that we're seeing here. And to peel back a layer here, to start off with the left, we focus on different building characteristics that affect building energy use, as well as the subsequent energy expenditure of buildings, looking at characteristics such as housing types, size, vintage, region, baseline heating source, which is a very important one, as well as the existence of AC today. For each of those households, we then apply different technology packages, looking at both the baseline today, as well as efficient building electrification, which is a combination of getting a heat pump for your space heating and water heating needs, efficient electric devices for everything else, building insulation upgrades, and then on top of that, vehicle electrification. So looking at a conventional gasoline vehicle today versus an EV. And in the future, as pointed out here, we'll also be looking at distributed energy resources, such as rooftop solar and storage. And then the final dimension here that I want to draw your attention to is the customer type within that household. So we want to make sure that we capture the difference of bills paid by renters versus homeowners, as well as customers that are eligible for bill discount programs and those that are not, to better understand this, to get at this question of what does energy burden look like today in Massachusetts. And so now to dig into that a little more as to what bills look like today, what energy use looks like today, and energy burden. So to set the stage, what we're looking at here is two different versions of the same household. The household on the left is a multifamily home in central Massachusetts that uses natural gas for heating and has a gasoline vehicle. And what the chart is showing you is the monthly energy consumption over the course of a year, broken out by different fuel types. And so the gray at the bottom is natural gas. The thin green sliver on top of that is electricity. And then on top of that, you have gasoline for your vehicle use. And so there's a couple of things that stand out here. The biggest one is the seasonality of this. And so you see that in the winter months, you have a lot of space heating load. And so as a result, this household uses a lot of natural gas. We then apply these technology packages to the same household to understand how energy use changes once you apply, once the household gets heat pumps for both space heating and water heating, and gets insulation improvements as well for its household energy use. On top of that, they also get an electric vehicle. And so there's a couple of major changes, as you can see. The first is you no longer have any natural gas or gasoline usage. It's all replaced with electricity. The second is that an electrified home with these technologies that we model is far more efficient. And so you see your overall energy use is significantly lower because of how much more efficient these devices are, as well as thanks to the effect of the insulation improvements. And then finally, you see that the seasonal shape still holds, and that the winter heating load is still significantly higher than the summer AC load from, say, May through September. And so the seasonality is a really crucial point that you should hold on to, because it has important consequences for rate design, as we'll see later on in the presentation. I'll also pause here to emphasize that what we're looking at throughout this presentation and throughout our analysis is prototypical homes. And so what that means is that these are representative households that represent these specific characteristics that we're focusing on. So this is specifically a multifamily home in central Massachusetts, and it's representative of homes with that particular set of characteristics, and should not be interpreted as an average across the state or across the utilities service territory. And the reason we're able to do this is that we draw from a very large publicly available data set put together by the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. The set of building energy use profiles is called ResStock, and it's a fantastic resource, and that's what we use for this exploration. And so now we want to set the stage for understanding the energy burden question today of for the lowest income households in Massachusetts, what do those households look like? What do their energy bills look like today? And what is the impact of bill discount programs today and the effectiveness of the bill discount programs in reducing energy burden for those households? And so that's what the next few slides will focus on. So first, what we're looking at here is digging into that question of what do low-income households look like compared to the rest of the state. And the bar on the left is looking at lower income households below 60% state median income, whereas the bar on the right is looking at the breakdown of housing types for households above that same 60% state median income threshold. And so there's a couple of things to note before I get to the takeaways. Red versus blue is single family versus multifamily. Dark versus light is smaller homes versus larger homes, with the median household size of around 1,700 square feet being that cutoff. And then the solid versus the shaded being newer homes built post 1970s versus older homes built pre 1970s. And so there's a lot to take in here, but the key takeaway is that lower income households tend to be smaller and older compared to higher income homes, as you can see by this largest wedge on the left side versus the corresponding wedge being much smaller on the right side. And the second major point being that higher income households tend to be single family homes rather than housing units within multifamily complexes. And so the takeaway is that lower income households tend to be older, smaller, and more predominantly in multifamily buildings. And to go a level further, we then want to understand for these lower income households, what does the heating type distribution look like? And what does the cooling technology distribution look like? The chart on the left is looking at heating type. And so the gray represents natural gas furnaces and boilers. The green represents electric resistance. The beige represents fuel oil, with the smaller proportions representing propane, heat pumps, and other fuels. And while you see that natural gas is still the most dominant across lower income households and higher income households, you do see that electric resistance, you do see that lower income households rely disproportionately on electric resistance for heating, which is very important because it ends up being very expensive per square foot. And then on the right, you see you have the darkest bar representing no AC, the slightly less dark blue representing room air conditioning, where each room has its own slightly inefficient air conditioning, air conditioning unit, and the light blue representing central air conditioning or central AC. And so you see that lower income households tend to use room ACs or have higher rates of no air conditioning, which also has important consequences when thinking about electrification, since electrifying and replacing these and putting in heat pumps that are able to provide 100% space cooling for your household may have some bill impacts in terms of increased cooling load, which is important again because in a warming climate, that additional cooling service is crucial, but has subsequent bill impacts that need to be factored in as well. And so to put this together, what this slide is now looking at is the impact of each of these characteristics on a building's energy bill. And so the y-axis here is your average monthly energy expenditure, and the different bars represent different household types to better isolate the impact of vintage as well as heating fuel for low-income homes versus higher-income homes. The three bars on the left represent lower-income homes. And so the first bar is an old, small multifamily building with electric resistance heating. And if we were to change just one of those dimensions and look at a very similar household that just has a newer building vintage compared to an older building vintage, you see that bills drop fairly dramatically. And that's because older, less efficient building shells allow more heat to escape, which then necessitate higher energy use from your gas furnaces, as well as higher energy use from your air conditioning in the summer. And so there's important energy bill consequences of these older building shells. If you then go from electric resistance heating to gas heating, you see another big drop in bills. And that's because electric resistance heating is very expensive compared to natural gas today. And if you then compare all of these three, to a new large single-family home, which is considerably larger than the three that we're seeing on the left. The ones on the left are all around 1,000 square feet, whereas the one on the right is much larger at 3,000 square feet. You see that despite having air conditioning and this much larger size, the bills are still lower than some of the more extreme electric resistance cases of lower income households. And so the key takeaway here is that electric resistance, as well as older building shells, end up having a significant impact on the energy bills and therefore energy burden of low income households. And so now we want to look at the impact that utility bill discount programs, as well as federal low income heating assistance has on energy burden for these households. Whereas the prior slide looked at energy bills before the assistance, and now we want to dig into the question of how much these discounts help for different households. The two sets of charts that we're looking at, the charts on the left are looking at a household that has 30% of the state median income. This represents around 25% of Massachusetts residents today. So it's an important vulnerable population that should be centered in this analysis. And the set on the right is looking at the 60% state median income mark, which again, as a reminder, is the threshold for energy bill assistance in Massachusetts. And so first looking at the households on the left, the green represents electric resistance heating before and after a bill discount, and the gray represents gas heating before and after a discount. And you see that even after the discount, which is 42% for the specific electric customer and 25% for the specific gas customer, you still end up with very high energy burden, 11% or 7% of your gross income spent just on meeting your energy needs. And so that's an important consideration when looking at the levels of today's bill discount programs. And it really highlights that this particular subset of low-income families living in small, old multifamily homes with electric resistance really are facing very high energy burdens today. Then to look at this threshold level of 60% state median income, you see that the bill discount programs do end up, again, having a significant impact in reducing energy burden from 9% to 6% for resistance customers and 5% to 4% for gas customers. But before we celebrate that, there's a couple of key considerations there as well. First, this is the threshold level, which means that there will be some households that are just above this that will not qualify for bill assistance and will end up seeing high levels of energy burden. And the second is that we know in Massachusetts that there is low enrollment in bill discount programs, or more specifically, not as much as there could be. And so that's an important consideration that means that these bill discount benefits are not being realized in the state. Another important consideration for low-income households is the seasonal volatility of energy bills, which is to say that because of the energy use seasonality that we mentioned, winter bills are significantly higher than summer bills. And you can see that here where your natural gas expenditure is very significant in the months of January and December compared to the rest of the year. And your electricity bills are higher in the summer months because of your air conditioning needs compared to the rest of the year. And so this is an important consideration because low-income households need to be able to prepare for the bills that they have to pay. And the seasonality is something that, the seasonality and volatility is something that is an additional challenge for these households. Next, we'll focus on some of the other considerations that aren't explicitly modeled, such as the intersections of income and race and other important characteristics that make some households more vulnerable to higher energy expense. Thanks to systemic inequities, different specific races such as Black, Hispanic, and Native American households have higher energy burdens both in the Boston metro area as well as the rest of the state and nationally. And it increases the likelihood of them living in these households, in these housing units that, as we pointed out, have significantly high energy expenditure and therefore high energy burden. It's also important to flag the renter-owner incentive problem where the renters are paying the energy bills, but the landlords are the ones who purchase the technology. And so there's an incentive problem as to a lack of an incentive to invest in efficient technologies. And so as a result, improving access to weatherization, energy efficiency, and housing opportunities would help address this problem. As flagged earlier, low enrollment in bill discount programs, as well as high participation in third-party electric supply contracts, can also exacerbate electricity expense and therefore exacerbate energy burden. And then finally, an important flag to mention here is that energy burden, as we have modeled it throughout this report, is not the complete picture, because hidden energy poverty is an important consideration as well, which is to say that lower income households, when the per unit electricity or gas costs are very expensive, may choose to weather temperatures indoor that are more unhealthy because of the extreme energy expense of choosing to turn up your heating or turn up your cooling. And so as a result, for example, Black households experience a greater need for health services due to these lower indoor temperatures during the winter seasons, especially, as reported in the sources mentioned below. And so these are some important considerations that we want to add in just to add some additional color to the conversation about what energy burden looks like for these households that are most vulnerable today. So the next couple of slides will be teeing up what the bill impacts of electrification look like for households with different heating fuel types. And the reason we're mentioning this now is to really set the stage for what the problem statement is as to which households see the biggest bill increases from building electrification, and what's preventing households from going out and adopting a heat pump tomorrow. And so what we see here is monthly average energy expenditure, including vehicle use, for a specific home that we've chosen to focus on. In this case, it's an older home in central Massachusetts that's heated by fuel oil. And so the chart on the left is first showing us for a baseline home today, gas vehicle with a fuel oil boiler, what does energy expense look like? The second bar looks at what happens if that household switches to a heat pump without an EV. And then the final one looks at what happens if that same household gets both the electrification package as well as an electric vehicle. And so what you see here is that because fuel oil is so expensive, you do see bill savings from EV adoption and home electrification. And this represents, around a quarter of Massachusetts homes. And so for these households today, the economics of electrification aren't as bad as some of the others. And so if you layer in the impacts on energy burden, you see that energy burden is high today for 60% state median income households, slightly lower for 80% moderate income households. And following the chart on the left, you see that as the household chooses to adopt a heat pump as well as an EV, you see a corresponding reduction in energy burden. But again, flagging that for households that are just above this bill discount threshold of 60% state median income, there is still significantly high energy burden. Yeah, and so that's an important point to flag. Next, if we look at electric resistance homes, as we've detailed till now, electric resistance is an expensive heating source. And so we look at a smaller home here, and again, following the same pattern, how the leftmost bar in the chart on the left looks at the baseline home without an EV that has resistance heating. What happens with that household then switches to a heat pump in the middle bar. And then finally, what happens if you layer in a heat pump as well as an electric vehicle. And so you see, because a heat pump is so much more efficient than an electric resistance device, you see massive bill savings from going from the first to the second bar, as well as additional bill savings in switching from gasoline to an EV. And so for the roughly 13% of Massachusetts homes heated by electric resistance, there is a big bill savings proposition of switching to heat pumps today. And then finally, we turn to gas homes, which represents over half of Massachusetts homes today that are heated by natural gas. And so here's where you really hone in on the problem statement, where as you go from, again, the leftmost bar to the middle bar on the left of the left chart, you see that there's a bill increase in going from your natural gas furnace or boiler to a heat pump. And so under existing rates, you do see this bill increase. And if you then go from the second to the third bar, despite uh, despite electric vehicles being cost effective and despite seeing bill savings compared to the gas vehicle, you still end up with a higher expense because of that bill increase from your heat pump. And so, as you can see, for the majority of households, this is today's economic proposition of adopting a heat pump. In addition to the higher upfront costs of a heat pump versus a gas furnace, this is a major challenge that we're hoping to address in this near-term rate design study. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Andrew, who will be walking through what are some of those near-term rate design options that can be pulled, or that can be explored to better thread this needle of customer energy affordability, as well as encouraging building and vehicle electrification.
Great, thanks, Vaughn. So yeah, we can go to that first slide there. And, I think out in front of this section, what I want to stress is that, this doesn't come out of nowhere. I think, Katie did a good job of noting this at the start also, but just the goals that we have for rate design have changed and sort of are changing as policy goals change. So, historically, conservation was really emphasized, right? We were relying on an electric system, full of fuels that have high variable cost, and so our goal was to, encourage folks to conserve, and that led to putting all of the sort of costs that we could into volumetric rates, intentionally low fixed charges, and structures like inclining block designs where, as you use more, you enter into a regime where you're paying more dollars per kilowatt hour used. However, I think as we outlined in our first session here, and as we've hinted at earlier today, we're entering a new regime in terms of policy goals, and we need rate design to follow that. So where conservation was sort of key before, it remains important today, but with all these renewable resources that have basically zero variable cost, and electrification being a key goal in terms of decarbonization, we need to make sure that we are setting up rates that allow this goal of electrification to basically like exist without being discouraged by rate design. And so the sort of key there is going to be to lower our volumetric component of the rates. And I won't go into the detail, sort of laid out on this slide, because we continue to talk about it in the slides after this. But that sort of context of just the changing environment here is really valuable to keep in mind as a motivating factor. So you can go to the next slide and talk about some of the ways that we're thinking about lowering that volumetric rate. And the thing to keep in mind here is that we need to remain revenue neutral with any of these designs, right? So if we're lowering our volumetric rate, then that lowers our collection, and so we need to recover that missing revenue elsewhere. And again, the three design sort of ideas here are ones that should be familiar to folks from the previous session, but I'll talk through them very quickly. So these three ideas, the first one being a declining block structure. So this, contrary to the inclining block structures of years past, is one in which you're paying some set amount for your first kilowatt hours per month used, but then after that, as you get into higher usage regimes, you're actually paying less. The idea there being that you can sort of set that block threshold such that a customer's increased load due to added electric heating basically falls in that second tier and comes at a cheaper cost to customers. Alternatively, we can think of something like a seasonal rate. Here, as we can see sort of graphically illustrated, we can acknowledge the fact that right now, Massachusetts and ISO New England as a whole is a summer peaking system. And so there are a lot of costs that are associated with how much we need to build out the system to meet that summer peak. And so we can acknowledge that in our rate design by increasing that summer rate and lowering the winter rate. That therefore means that if customers are adopting heat pumps, right? We saw in Vivant's sort of annual usage graphic that means there's a lot more usage in the winter months, but we're able to decrease the rate for those winter months and keep bills a little bit more under control. And then the third idea here is a higher fixed charge. And so this gets more fundamentally at the idea that, to encourage conservation previously and to make rates easy to understand, we put a lot of costs into the volumetric component of rates that could arguably be tied to just being, attached to the system at all, or could be tied more to demand or something like that. So sort of pulling back some of those charges that are in the volumetric portion of the rates and putting those into the fixed charge, so increasing the fixed charge. Historically, this has been a bit of an unpopular idea, principally due to concerns over equitable rate design and wanting to make sure that we're not hurting low usage customers. But there are some really interesting ideas out there now and being implemented in California, in which they're working on income graduated fixed charges. So they're the fixed charge that you pay is actually tied to your income level. And as a result, that sort of additional lever on the fixed charge amount gives you much better control of your bill impacts and allows you to sort of mitigate the possible negative impacts that we'd see on low income customers there. We can go to the next slide and start to look at some examples, right? These are not rate levers that we've come up with in a vacuum, but things that exist and are out there today across the country. I don't want to talk through each of these in detail, but I think there are a couple things to note. One is just that, looking at this table, you can see that often people aren't just choosing a single rate lever to pull on, but rather saying, okay, we want time of use rate design, and we want to have a higher fixed charge or a demand charge. We want seasonal design and maybe also a higher fixed charge or something else. So I think these sort of rates that are out there do a good job of emphasizing the fact that we're not looking to just say, okay, this is our single idea. We're going to do seasonal rates and that's it. That's all that we're going to do. But instead acknowledging that these different rate design ideas can be combined with each other, but also critically can be combined with other programs out there to make electrification more affordable and I think from the utility perspective also more controlled if we talk about sort of DER like management systems that utilities are working on setting up. I will just quickly highlight a couple of these that are sort of local to us up in Maine, where they do have a seasonal heat pump pilot for Central Maine Power, and in that they've basically set up their winter rate to just be the supply cost. It's they've basically put all of the delivery charges into the summer rate, and then the winter rate for customers who have heat pumps is really just based on providing kilowatt hours and not on maintaining the system. And then we can see that Versant Power, also up in Maine, has a declining block. Again, technology specific rate up there. So, local examples abound as well. If we go to the next slide, we can start to get a little more specific about our study in particular. There is a lot of information on this slide. I'm going to work on highlighting just a few things, but I think what's useful here is that we've been talking so far a little bit in the abstract about how these rate design levers work and what motivates them. But on this slide, we can start to see what the charges actually look like if we're going to design these in a revenue neutral way. So I'll note first off, up in the right-hand corner of this slide, you can see the sort of starting rate that we're using to develop each of the examples here, which is the existing Eversource residential rate that has a $10 per month fixed charge and then a 34-cent per kilowatt hour volumetric charge, which is split evenly between the supply part of the bill and the delivery part of the bill. So you'll see for each of these rate options, we're listing both what the new charges look like and how they differ from that existing Eversource rate, which is a useful thing to see, because that way we get a sense of, how much are we increasing, how much are we decreasing. And we'll just take these one at a time and talk about them briefly. So again, these ideas should all be pretty familiar based on the past couple slides, but our first option is this higher fixed charge rate. Here we're borrowing a little bit of the wisdom from our friends in California and setting a fixed charge at about $30 a month. That's pretty similar to where they've ended up there. And as a result, we get to decrease our volumetric rate by about 4 cents. So again, the need to maintain revenue neutrality means that we, in spite of that large fixed charge increase, we only get to bump down the volumetric rate a fairly small amount. But as we'll see, there's still a reasonable impact that we get from that. So interesting to understand what we get out of that. I'll note also that when we talk about that first option, that is a class-wide rate design. So we're saying that would be for all residential customers. Option 2A listed here is another class-wide rate design that we're testing out. This one, instead of increasing a fixed charge, we're sort of keeping all the costs in the volumetric charge, but changing how they are set in the summer versus the winter. So again, the idea here is that, as the system is summer peaking today, we can acknowledge that a bit and basically throw more of our delivery portion of the bill into that summer charge. And so what we end up with in this particular example is a 37 cent per kilowatt hour summer rate, and that lets us bump the winter rate down by about 5 cents. So again, we can see how this will benefit folks who are heating their homes with electricity during the winter, but there is of course some concern here since we're bumping the summer rate up about what those bill impacts will look like for customers cooling their homes during the summer. One thing that gets at that concern a little bit is the idea of having technology specific rates. So we saw a couple examples of this on the last slide. And what's nice about a technology specific rate is that you don't have to worry so much about what's happening to customers who just ended up on this rate, but sort of didn't opt into it. Right. So if we're setting up a heat pump specific rate and saying this is an opt-in rate, then people are going to sort of be in charge of their own decision to opt in, and we can be because it's an opt-in rate, we can be a lot more ambitious in terms of our design. And so this option 2B that we see here is basically taking the same idea that we saw in central main power on the last slide and saying, okay, let's just put all of our delivery charges into that summer rate. It bumps it up by 8 cents, which is a bunch, but we know that all the customers who are opting into this rate will benefit hugely from the winter decrease, right? So basically just paying supply cost in the winter, and that means that those customers who have most of their household energy usage or electricity usage specifically in the winter will see a nice discount over the course of the year. And then the final rate that we explore here, which we've talked about already, is the declining block structure. And again, we're regarding this as a technology specific rate. And so again, we're being pretty ambitious and we're saying, okay, let's just collect all of the delivery costs in the first 500 kilowatt hours per month. And then any usage that comes after that will basically just be the supply cost. And, again, this is perhaps a slightly less targeted way to improve the economics for, high wintertime heating usage. But, perhaps a little more targeted towards EV usage. In terms of having that second tier just be low cost no matter what time of year it's occurring in. So we can go ahead to the next slide now and start to understand some analytical results as we dig into these rates. So I'll spend a moment just orienting us around the graphic that we're seeing here. So what we're looking at on the vertical axis is the dollars per month change in bills. So this is a customer who was not electrified and on a given rate, and then when they electrify, what does their bill change to, right? So we're looking at that change when they electrify, and we're looking at it both in sort of the left-hand cluster of bars in terms of just home electrification, and in the right-hand cluster of bars, home electrification plus getting that EV as well. And as you can see, each of the different bars here is corresponding to one of the rate designs that we talked about in the previous slide. and we've got our gray bar showing that existing rate also. And so consistent with the results that Vivon showed us earlier, in terms of the existing rate, this is a gas home again. And so when the gas home electrifies, we're seeing a bill increase, right? For, both if they're just adding heating, or if they're adding, whole home plus EV as well. For our other rate designs, we sort of see all the things that we've talked about in principle, sort of come to life here. They all perform better than the existing rate, which is expected, but also good news. And I think there are sort of two key takeaways that I want to pull attention to here. The first one just being that if we look at the right-hand cluster of bars versus the left-hand cluster of bars, in every case, we're doing better on the right-hand side. And so one of the things that we can note there is just that, electric vehicle adoption is across the board leading to bill savings, right? It's sort of always working out here. The other thing that's really worth pointing out is the difference that we're seeing between our class-wide rate designs. So that sort of dark blue and yellow bar versus our technology-specific rate designs, the brown and light blue bars. And so, we can see that in the case of whole home electrification, we're doing better than we were in terms of bill impact with our class-wide designs, but still seeing a bill increase. We add the EV to that and the picture looks better, but we're basically just breaking even. And, that's all right, but we still want to in an ideal world, want to do better, right? We're trying to really send a signal here that aligns with our policy goals. And our technology specific rates seem to actually do that pretty well. Right, not surprisingly, again, we talked about how we were able to be more ambitious in terms of our design for those rates. And as a result, we can see that we're seeing bill savings for home electrification and, more dramatic bill savings up to $100 a month when we look at adding the EV as well. One thing that we want to be really looking at, if we go to the next slide, is the impact on non-electrifying customers. And so what we're showing in this graphic on the right-hand side now is the impact on a customer who was on the existing rate and then gets moved over to one of these class-wide rates. And again, this isn't a customer who's electrifying, this is just a customer with fossil heating, regular combustion vehicle. But we want to basically understand how these class-wide rates would impact folks who aren't electrifying. And what we see is that it's a modest impact, but it is a bill increase for those customers. And so that's something that we want to be keeping our eyes on and aware of and possibly mitigating. Going to the next slide here, we want to also look specifically at our low-income customers that we flagged earlier. And so here we're taking two building prototypes that, as Vivon highlighted before, are pretty typical building types for our low-income residents. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at a multifamily unit in Boston with electric resistance heating. And here, I think not too surprisingly, the story is a pretty positive one, largely based on the fact that, again, going from electric resistance heating to a heat pump, we're just seeing huge efficiency gains. And so bills are decreasing because of that. On the right-hand side, this is looking at a gas-heated building, a single-family old building in Western Mass. And in this case, we are actually, again, seeing bill decreases in every case here, including the existing rate. And the reason for that is based not so much on rate design. So you can see based on the rate design that we're looking at, the impact sort of increases in terms of the bill savings that folks are seeing. But the real thing driving this is the fact that the bill discount program for electric is a higher percentage than the bill discount program for gas. So that means that, for folks who qualify for these bill discount programs, a gas customer sees, X percent of their total bill decreased or sort of cut away at the end. And when they switch over to electric, that percentage is going up in terms of the total bill decrease. and that's resulting in like a net bill decrease as they switch overall. So, that paints a fairly rosy picture, but I think we do want to point out some of the flaws in these designs as well, and we'll get to those in the next few slides. We can look at the next one here, and again, we are still looking at our low-income customers here, but now we're looking at folks who are not electrifying, right? So again, this is understanding how those class-wide rate designs impact our LMI folks. And the story on the left-hand side isn't, again, too interesting or surprising. This is our electric resistance customer in a small building or in a small unit. And again, just the switch, or rather, sorry, the fact that they're already a high energy using customer in the winter means that a high fixed charge or a seasonal rate will benefit them. So that's sort of an electric resistance customer, benefiting from a rate design that is there to help a heat pump customer benefit. So not surprising that those two things are aligned. On the right-hand side, though, again, this is back to a gas customer. And here, this customer isn't benefiting from the larger percent discount on their bill. They're sort of much in the same way that the non-LMI customers saw a modest bill increase. They are also seeing a modest bill increase here. And we can understand why that is a little bit better on the next slide, where we start to look specifically at how a fixed charge impacts different customer types. So necessarily, again, if you're designing, a class-wide revenue neutral rate, then that means that, there will be some folks who see a bill increase. And what we're seeing on the left-hand side of this graphic are a couple bars showing what a customer's bill looks like for a low usage customer. This is a 300 kilowatt hours per month customer. And we're looking at their bill under existing rates and then under this higher fixed charge rate. And here, because they are a low usage customer, the sort of all costs bundled into that volumetric rate structure really benefits them. But then when we switch over to having more fixed charges that aren't related directly to usage, we see their bill go up by about $11 a month in this case. Alternatively, on the right, we're looking at what we consider to be a high usage customer. So this is 1,100 kilowatt hours a month. And for this customer, right, as we tie fewer charges to the volumetric portion of the bill and increase that fixed charge, just the opposite of the other case, right, they're actually seeing a bill decrease of about 6% of their bill, or $22 a month. So I think, this highlights something that I think many people sort of know intuitively when we start to talk about fixed charge rates, which is just that, we want to clearly understand what's happening for our low usage customers and our high usage customers. So, I sort of view this as a good warning flag, but not a showstopper. And, I'll take this opportunity to again highlight the additional lever that we can have when we start to tie fixed charges to income level. So there's plenty of exciting work that's been ongoing in California along these lines, but having that additional lever allows us to really look at specific customer types and say, okay, if we want to make sure that these low income customers are making out okay in spite of a higher fixed charge, then we can sort of set that fixed charge graduation in a really intentional way to control where those impacts happen. Going to the next slide, we turn ourselves to seasonal rates. And again, we want to look at some of the downsides to seasonal rates here, and it's not going to be anything too surprising. I think it again ties to our intuition that, for increasing our summer rate in order to decrease our winter rate, then folks who are cooling in the summer are going to see some sort of bill increase there. So what we're showing in this particular graph is the bill by month for a customer that's in a small multifamily home in Western Mass. And just using room air conditioners, right? So window units here, not covering 100% of their air conditioning load. And yet still, that sort of shift in rates as we go to a seasonal rate impacts them negatively. They end up paying more in those summer months. And sure, they're paying a little bit less in the winter months, but their electric usage profile, given that they're heating, with gas or oil, they're not heating with electricity, so their usage profile is highest in the summer, and so they're not really benefiting much from that winter rate decrease. If we go forward one slide, we see what happens for that same customer if their usage profile changes. So this is now giving that customer a heat pump, right? So they're now covering 100% of their cooling service demand, right? Cooling their entire house with the heat pump, which is why you sort of see the general level of electricity usage go up, but also huge electricity usage jumps in those shoulder periods of the graph, right? That's our winter heating. And so now they're benefiting a lot more from that decreased winter rate, right? You can see the blue line dropped below the red line more visibly here. But still in this case, not quite enough to make up for the summer increase, right? Where they're paying more for their cooling load. And in this case, actually, increasing their cooling load too, because they're able to cool their entire house, which, is certainly a good thing in a warming climate, right? That's good for health. But we want to understand the bill impacts of that also. So that's what happens if we're doing this sort of class-wide, like modest seasonal rate. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that we can hit the sweet spot of really actually getting like excellent bill decreases if we look at our targeted, technology-specific seasonal rate. And in this case, we're hitting that sweet spot of a high summer-winter price differential and high winter usage that leads to annual bill savings, right? So even though their summer rate is quite high in this case, and they're cooling their entire house, that increase is more than offset by the decrease in winter heating costs. So the ability to like really pull on that summer winter lever for a technology specific rate gives us the ability to, push that winter rate down enough to really see annual benefits there. We can go forward to the next slide here and start to look at a bit of a summary. So there's a bit to take in here, and I'm going to walk through this not in too much detail, but at least a little bit to get us sort of oriented and on the same page. But I want to preface this by saying this is basically our like qualitative summary of what we think we're seeing in terms of like the pros and cons, listed out in a few different categories of each of these rate levers that we've been testing out here. And I want to stress, like, this is not by any means sort of the final take on this, right? This is us writing down, our impressions, but we definitely want to hear from folks in the like listening sessions, maybe in comments today, but certainly in the listening sessions when folks have had a chance to digest this material a little bit more. I'm very eager to, just get other input on this, right? These are qualitative ratings. So, this is informed by analysis, but certainly there's more to it than that. And we want to make sure that we're sort of, getting as many brains thinking about this as possible to make sure that we're portraying this well. But just to talk through the categories and a few highlights in here, our first category is electrification affordability. And, as we saw in our results, I think this one is a bit straightforward. There's, some benefit for our class-wide rates, but then when we get to our technology-specific rates, we really see, excellent affordability for electrification there. One interesting thing to note is that for our seasonal rates, given that EV load is inherently non-seasonal, we don't really see any impact on EV bill affordability for those seasonal rates. But also, we saw in our results that EV affordability looks pretty okay even today as is. Another category here that we've talked about is baseline affordability. And again, for fixed charges, we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of the ability to graduate those fixed charges if we are moving forward with that sort of design to ensure that we're sort of controlling for that piece. And with our seasonal rates, then that's where, as we saw, we start to worry about the high cost for summer cooling load. And of course, for an opt-in rate, we don't really worry about baseline affordability, so no scores there. In terms of aligning with cost of service, the sort of principal thing that we've thought of here to sort of get us into the red category or the green category is just whether or not we are continuing to put all sorts of non-volumetric costs into volumetric charges, which is why you see the fixed charge score, pretty good there. And the others not doing as well because those are still maintaining a system where, basically we're paying for almost everything through our volumetric charge, even if we are varying it either by usage level or by season. And another thing to note there is that while the seasonal rates do well to sort of align our high cost rates with our high cost period in the summer today, this will only be true for about another decade or so, and then we'll start to see a flip into winter peak. And so we want to be careful about setting folks up on a rate that says, hey, great, like use all you want during the winter, when we know that at some point we're going to have to take that back a little bit. We also have a sort of vague unintended consequences category. And in here, just highlighting a couple things where we've placed notes. One thing to think about in the seasonal rates is what this does for NEM customers. This is something that we're still exploring, but there is a potential that with higher summer rates, NEM customers, generating more kilowatt hours in the summer, maybe seeing more credits generated from that. And we want to understand what that'll sort of look like over the course of the year and just sort of in general. So that's something that we are continuing to look into moving forward. And also worth pointing out for the decline in block rate that we sort of lose our conservation signal. Well, it's still a nearly 30-cent rate or oh, sorry, it is a like 17-cent rate in the summer for that particular design. So yeah, we've mostly lost our signal for summertime conservation. And then our final category here is just ease of implementation. We know that fixed charges have been hard to get through in the past. Any kind of like class-wide rate design, I think, just is a harder thing to implement in terms of getting regulatory, political alignment, et cetera. And I think while the like billing system work to do these technology specific rates might be a little bit challenging, just sort of pushing those through the process and saying, okay, this is an opt-in rate, that makes it a much simpler process in terms of implementation in our eyes. So that's a lot of summary right there. I'll conclude just with 2 slides that I'll go through pretty quickly to summarize all the things that we've seen across the 2 sections of our presentation today. So I'm not going to read these down the line because I think folks have gotten to come to these conclusions already or see us state them. But generally, electric resistance customers, things look great when you install a heat pump, right? It's basically an efficiency measure. Oil customers, things look pretty decent most of the time. Gas customers, that's when we really start to see problems. Bill increases up to 100% or $100 a month. And we know that this is a common heating arrangement for low-income households as well. So we want to really keep our eyes on that. Vehicle electrification generally looks pretty good, but not enough to offset home electrification in the cases where we're seeing an increase for a gas customer. Also some additional considerations around, access to at-home charging, which is usually harder for multifamily residents. And, we also want to flag here, I think I mentioned this before, but flag just that, we shouldn't just be looking at rate design alone, especially for vehicle electrification. There are a lot of existing programs out there to reward people for off-peak charging. And I think more in the works too to sort of push the envelope on this and, get folks bigger discounts and get utilities more comfortable with lots of like controlled charging on their systems. So I think the rebates that are out there today are relatively small, but there's certainly potential there for programs to be a big piece of this puzzle in terms of building towards saving cost to the system overall, but more relevant to our conversation today, saving customers dollars based on their program participation. And then also we talked about cooling, right? How we want to acknowledge the benefit of cooling available to more people, right? Whole house cooling, but we need to be aware of the bill impacts from that. And one thing that we didn't talk about much today, but is worth flagging, is just that the shell improvements that we're seeing as part of electrification measures or outside of them, those reduce our heating and cooling demand and also are a tool to help offset bill increases, especially in older homes. So that's sort of the view of current rates, and finally getting to our near-term rates on the next slide. Again, we saw fixed rates seasonal rates, and declining block structures all doing better than the current rates that are out there in terms of encouraging electrification. We saw some issues with our class-wide rate designs in terms of how we impact customers, summer cooling, and a few other things that I'm not going to go through in great detail here because it was very recent in the presentation and we're running long on time. And then we saw also that, technology-specific rates give us more leeway, give us, an ability to be a bit more aggressive in our rate design and therefore to encourage electrification better. But there are still things to figure out there and pieces that we want to make sure we're considering thoroughly in terms of unintended consequences and whatnot as well. So that is our sort of big summary, and I will, I think, turn it over to Austin now to close us out.
All right. Big thank you to Yvonne and Andrew for going through that. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll jump into a phase for public comments.